Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us. This is a very exciting night for us as we kick off the next phase of working with the Hartford to market that prime facility in our community. I want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank the Hartford and Tom Bartel, who's here this evening. I think folks know Tom, and we're very grateful to the Hartford for their partnership and working with the towns to make sure that we get the best project possible for our community. I also want to thank the town officials for supporting the town's contribution for this partnership, this initiative to create a proactive approach to economic development began really immediately when Hartford informed the towns that they had sold off their portions of their portfolio, and we're looking to change the way that the facility is used and to put the facility on the market. This is a very unique approach to economic development, very positive. I think folks in the economic development area can't think of a time when a town and a private company worked together to come up with plans before there was actually a potential developer. So we're really excited about this program. We began with the charrette in September, and since then there's been a lot of work done by our partners Gateway. You'll hear from them tonight. And also Hiram and his staff, so thank you Hiram for all your hard work in putting a plan together. We now have a draft code that we're rolling out tonight to hear from you and the public as to what input they have in the project. The next step would be to take those comments that we received tonight, take the comments from Hartford, and take the comments back to our elected officials on the land use boards and commissions and come up with a best proactive approach for the facility. We also are currently working with the state of Connecticut on a model for Connecticut to look at a way to streamline a lot of the state regulations, and we're really pleased that our state partners are also working with our town as well. So we look forward to hearing your comments tonight, and now I'll turn it over to Hiram, and thank you, Hiram. You can introduce Scott and Jay and our folks from Gateway.
Great. Thanks very much. I too would like to thank you for coming out on this lovely summer evening. But the troopers are here, so that's really the important part. Appreciate that very much. This has been an interesting process from the beginning, exciting, and in many ways unique in terms of the things that Mary mentioned in terms of working with the Hartford and trying to put a product together that will satisfy some potential developer or developers on the site and still get out of it a program or a product that the townspeople can accept and hopefully be very, very proud of in the future. Tonight, we plan to read every single one of the 61 pages of the code to you, word for word. No, I'm just kidding. But go over the code in general, talk a little bit about the flow chart, the process of how the process works, and a little bit about the two scenarios that Gateway has come up with that were a product of the charrette that Mary mentioned a moment ago. So both Scott Polikoff from Gateway and Jay Narana from Livable Plans will talk to you briefly this evening about that. What we really want to get are comments from you. If you have any tonight, that's great. If they don't occur to you until midnight or something, please email me or tomorrow. We would like to move this forward so that we can get this, as Mary said, back in front of the land use commissions as soon as possible. The primary commission that will ultimately act on this, assuming an application is actually made by the property owner, we'll work with that and how that works, will go to the zoning commission, but there'll be referrals to the planning commission. The design review board will be carefully involved in it as well because it is a form-based code. Conservation will be involved in it as well because there are sensitive properties, parts of this property that need to be considered. So all the land use commissions, certainly economic development, will be involved in the process as well. So we'd like to move that forward through that process in the very near future. We hope it's a vigorous discussion process. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or call me or whatever, or catch me whenever you can. Let me know. But without delaying further, I think Scott's going to go first. Is that how we're going to? Scott's going to talk a little bit about Gateway and their process, part of the process. And then Jay will talk to us a little bit more about the specifics of how the code works. So, Scott Polikoff from Gateway. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Hiram. Appreciate it. We're going to be brief because what we really like to do is answer any questions. But I think it's worth reinforcing a little more something that the first selectman said, and that is that because this is a very unique approach in terms of a partnership between the town of Simsbury, the Hartford staff, the community, the consultant team, and CBRE, where we're all effectively kind of scoping the outcome and then figuring out the details to make sure that there's alignment. And the outcome is repositioning this really amazing building and piece of property that balances and really brings together the community's vision, the market, and the site itself, which has tremendous opportunity. And I think that's important because traditionally the way these kinds of projects are done is either a developer moves forward, does a development plan, tries to bring it under some sort of entitlement that either exists or they propose their own, and then there's a reaction by the community and then the public sector. Or, as in the case of the town center, which this is a very different situation, the community through the town goes through a planning process, creates a new zoning framework and an entitlement framework looking at all the factors, and binds together multiple ownerships under one vision and one entitlement framework. I agree, I've never seen one quite like this where actually, because there's a single owner, there's the ability to do that together from the very beginning. And so what we've tried to do in calibrating the draft code, and I know people are busy, so some of you may not have had a chance to review it, and some of you may not review it. You may rely on some of your friends, and if you feel like he or she says it's a good one or there's some problems, then you rely on that. But for those of you that have reviewed it and have questions, that's our primary goal tonight, is to try and receive any input that you think will improve it, or answer questions about the process to strike the balance. And when I say strike the balance, I'm talking about the need, and let's be candid, the need to work together now to agree on what the outcome should be in terms of design, community impact, and the actual development itself, so that if CBRE delivers a prospect, we can work together to move the prospect through the process quickly, as opposed to a protracted kind of, well, this is what we thought the community meant, this is what the prospective purchaser thinks they need, and ultimately this is what the Hartford believes makes sense from a decision to actually sell it or not to sell it. So the document actually reflects the ability to bring all of that together. I don't think there's any disagreement. In fact, I think there's broad agreement that that's the way we should go about it, but there isn't a formula for it. And so one of the things that I think will be apparent when you look at the document is that it does have a set of design tools that are prescriptive when you put them together, but it doesn't lay out a specific design result like you would see if you look at the town center form-based code. Why? Because we don't have an investor, a developer, or a purchaser yet at the table. So we've effectively established a two-step process, and that is if a purchaser comes in, they are required to put a general concept together. Hopefully, for those of you that were at the charrette or saw the results, you remember this, but when we talk about a general concept, this is what we're talking about. Whether we're talking about infill development within the parking area around the office building, as we discussed, there could be multiple different things in terms of some specialized retail and maybe some residential, and maybe, for example, on the 40 acres, a retirement or continuing life cycle care environment, assisted living, retirement, market rate housing, let's say a 30 or 40,000 square foot specialty retail store with some specialty retail and restaurants where you actually have a neighborhood that could support and complement the reuse of this building. Well, this concept is based on several things that we considered in terms of a likely outcome. So whether a purchaser likes what we've already done in the charrette, the odds of that are probably not going to be exactly aligned, but hopefully it's influential because we've done real market analysis. We've received some great feedback from the development community in the area, and frankly, we have community buy-in to this point that the vision that's emerged makes sense. In the next step, we would then ask the applicant to put together basically a master site development plan, and in order to do that, you would have to create a framework plan. And so what we're recommending is that we attach to the code for adoption by the zoning board, the zoning commission, that it actually has illustrative framework plans, but we don't actually establish the framework plan. Again, because it's too presumptuous for us to establish a street network, the various character zones that reflect a specific concept. But we want to give some guidance to say, when you come in with your idea of what the development should be, both for adaptive reuse and maybe a different utilization of the parking and some greenfield development on the 40 acres, then what you have to do is look at the code itself and make a decision on what you think the framework plan should be, and then ultimately the detail and the master site development plan, which would then represent the aggregation of the design tools within the code. So it is a form-based code where we are actually looking at how do the buildings relate to each other, how do the design of the public frontages of the streets relate to the private frontages of buildings down the streets. But we're allowing that with a wide variety of uses. Now, the uses on the office property are going to be still more tilted towards industrial plus mixed-use residential office retail. The uses in working through our market analysis and the community process over here, of course, would not be industrial. They'd be more community-based office retail residential. So I just wanted to reinforce that what we're doing is we're setting up the requirement for the applicant to come in and establish a framework, but these are illustrative. We are not actually coming up with our own framework, unlike what you did for the town center. Because in the town center, you already have established patterns, historical development patterns. You have multiple owners. So the point of the town center process was to get the owners together and to agree on how they relate to each other. But this project probably will have 3 or 4 specialized vertical developers under the umbrella of a master developer. And until we have that table set with participants who understand both what they think the market will bear and what they think the community vision needs to be, and frankly what they think they need to generate in terms of yield long-term in terms of rents and sales per square foot to back into a sales price, then I think we would be cutting off early some creative opportunities down the line. So that's the balance. There's a lot of prescription in the design tools in the document, but we're not putting them together. We're asking the applicant, the purchaser, the developer to do that. And I think that's very unique. So here's another, this was the one of the other illustrative plans where we had more of a conservation design, where we had a lower impact on the 40 acres with some potential farmland preservation, and where we just had a fundamental adaptive reuse of the property, maybe a multi-tenant use. We talked about some interesting light industrial strategies within the building, preserving the data center and maybe having a local brewery facility. I mean, there was a lot of different options. I think, John, you know, you're still kind of getting feedback that the single tenant strategy is going to be tough. So the other thing that we've done in structuring this ordinance is making it easy to break the building up into multiple tenants, or if theoretically it made sense, to maybe use less than the entire building. And I know there's certain components that would still have to be kept in place in terms of the physical plant, but maybe one wing of the building is no longer needed and part of the building is demised. I mean, there's the point is we won't know that, and the tool that we have reflected in the document, I think, creates maximum flexibility to do that, but still represents a strong vision of what should be done with the site. And then here's an illustrative example of another framework plan that would set up the final master site development plan that's required in detail in the document in terms of parking and how the uses relate and all of that. We did not do an illustrative master site development plan because that's really taking the document all the way through its entire required steps of putting all the tools together. And frankly, that's unnecessary. But we wanted to give enough guidance that anybody who purchases the property and uses the tool would have to go through a conceptual planning process, develop the framework, understanding what are the impacts on Hopmeadow, the connections, the watershed, the relationships back to the wetlands, whether or not you would want to do a pedestrian connection, and all those things that we discussed that are sensitive constraints that have to be respected and are required. In doing this, we worked very closely, and Jay, you and Hiram went back and forth a lot, and I think it was well worth it to understand how we could set up a unique process to incorporate the required and traditional steps and the boards and commissions, but not to engage those boards and commissions in a way that was unnecessary. So they developed a process, and hopefully you all picked one of these up. If not, we can hand one out. Jay, you might have some more general comments if I've missed something that you think is important for the overall role of the code. But what we wanted to do is have Jay walk you through the general construct of the process, where you've got basically 4 different avenues you can go down in terms of the types of applications, all the way from just a simple adaptive reuse to a complete reinvention of both one or both of the sites. And that implicates different steps, but we still fundamentally, we tried to maintain as much staff discretion within the framework. And the reason we're doing that is predictability. Again, this is a single owner that wants to be able to go out to the marketplace and create some very clear expectations, so that if somebody were to take this seriously, they were to enter into a contract for sale and go through the due diligence process, depending on what they think the potential is, one or a number of scenarios, they could look at this document and they could anticipate exactly what it would take to go from purchase to development in terms of the cost, the process, and to the extent they wanted to deviate significantly from what this reflects, they would understand the consequences of that. And so this process that we've developed with Hiram, I think, and we were with staff earlier today, key staff in addition to Hiram, and we got some really good feedback. One of the things that we added was probably some sort of early referral to the Conservation Commission for just advisory input, regardless of the type of application. And then later on, the Conservation Commission would come back in if there was a significant impact in terms of wetlands or some of the other sensitivities on the site. But I thought that was, Howard made that recommendation that because this is a really highly regarded location, high profile, visible, and felt like some early input that's advisory only from the Conservation Commission would make sense. So we would draw a box off of this second box here to the right that says referral for advice and for guidance. That way you can head off any potential challenges down the line that could have tremendous regulatory effect and also delay, especially if you're talking about implications with the other regulatory regimes you have in terms of the river corridor, the Army Corps, for example, and just some early advice on, okay, if this is what you want to accomplish, this is what you're up against. Have you thought about alternative lower impact strategies? And maybe some early advice from the Conservation Commission could actually end up improving the project and streamlining ultimately the time it would take for the project to move forward. My guess is, Tom, I'm probably not out on a limb, knowing that I'm sure whomever puts this under contract, depending on the aggressive nature of the vision they have for the property, there's going to be some contingencies. And there's going to be risks and rewards associated with those contingencies. So this is, I think, a document that reflects as much the balance of those risks and rewards in the private process of selling a property as it does in the traditional role that regulation plays in terms of reflecting the community's vision and the developer's desire to deliver something in the marketplace. So it is unusual. It's exciting. This is, yes, there's snow on the ground, but this is exotic, and we're really excited to be a part of it. We just need somebody to come in and take a 500,000 square feet, and you guys, that'll probably, if we get to 500,000, that's close enough, right? So, Jay?
Yes, I'll just pull up the flow chart.
Any questions before we move into the details of the process? Any general feedback? And if you haven't had enough time to absorb the document, my guess is most people haven't, we've got time to get your feedback. If you want a Word document so you can provide us track changes, some people like that, happy to do it. And we're all available. Jay, you've been living it more than anybody, so if you have some detailed questions, let Hiram know and we can get those answered.
Another way I would put it, Scott, is like you have some jigsaw pieces of the puzzle, and you can put the puzzle together in different ways. And there's no right on answer or wrong answer. It's really, just depends on what the vision of the developer is, and to make sure that it's consistent with the town's vision, we have an overall, set of parameters where, there is some rhyme and reason for the jigsaw puzzle, that it can't all be willy-nilly, but it still has to meet the overall town vision, but you still have flexibility to adjust those pieces as the market evolves. And one of the things we wanted to make sure with the process is that we really don't know what the ultimate positioning of the existing building, the existing parking lot, the greenfield sites are different kind of issues with different parts of the site, so we want to make sure the application process can address that. So we actually had to establish 4 different types of application, and from the most easy to the most complex. The type 1 would be you're not doing anything to the building from on the exterior, you're just kind of reusing the existing building, you're just kind of taking another tenant and putting it in the existing building, so you're not even making any exterior changes. That's the simplest process, where it's basically a staff review and approval to make sure it's consistent with the what was originally approved. So that makes it easy to get somebody in the door as soon as possible. And once you keep within the existing footprint, you're changing, you're demising a portion of the building, you're doing some exterior remodel, then the design review commission is involved, and then it becomes a zoning commission approval through a consent agenda. So it's like we try to make sure that the type of application, the scope of what they were doing to the site is equivalent to the type of review. So if you're not doing a whole lot, the review is less too. So if you're doing more, there's greater review. So once you start adding a new building, then the master site development plan kicks in, where then you have to actually do the plan for the overall site. Either if you're just taking a north site, it's just for the north. You don't have to do it for both the sites, but you can't just take a portion of the southern site and do it. You have to just take the whole site. So it's really, you're not required to do the master site development plan on day one until you're actually going to put a new building, and increase the square footage on the site. That's when it gets triggered. So, and then if you have a totally creative idea that's not really envisioned in the original concept, based on the design workshop we had in September, and the developer has a totally new idea concept, that goes through an alternative compliance. So the applicant comes forward with a totally new set of rules and standards for what they want to do. So it's really almost like a PAD application that's processed through as a type 4 application, which kind of opens up all the different decisions at that point. So we really have a lot of different ways that this process can go through, from the easiest to the most complex. So that way, the community knows, and they're given notice in terms of what the outcome is going to be if it's not in keeping with the vision that was developed in the original plan. So that's really a summary of this whole flow chart, and I know it's a little bit complicated. We're going to try and simplify it and break it down by each different application type. So to make it easier for a developer who picks it up and can glance at it in 30 seconds and know what's needed. So
Meaning 4 different flow charts.
yeah, 4 different flow charts.
Yeah.
So with that, Hiram, anything that we missed that we should add, Scott?
John, do you want to add anything? Any comments about kind of where we're at, or?
I think that what you've heard is sort of an overview of where the process is now, and a good explanation of this flow chart, which looks fairly complex. I think as we talked earlier today, the possibility of perhaps breaking it down where maybe you can just simply turn on the type 1 application and print that, and turn off the type 2 and so on. I think it should be pretty easy to do that. So it'll make it simpler for folks to understand exactly where they are. The fact that there are definitions down at the bottom of the different application types, once you've had a chance to read that, take a look at that and see if you agree with it or if that needs to be modified in any way. What we're really trying to do here, from my point of view, is to make it as simple as possible for a potential developer that has a good concept that fits in with the framework that's been established that we've talked about so far. We think that there is a tremendous amount of potential. There's a lot of flexibility, but still trying to balance that with making sure that the land use commissions and the townspeople and the residents get something out of it that they think will be valuable. That's really the trick of it all. And at the same time, making sure that the Hartford is satisfied with that process. So that's basically it. We'd like to hear whatever comments you have this evening, and certainly going forward in the future. So that's really all I have at this point.
I know we haven't established Hiram a critical path yet to start going to the boards and commissions and ultimately zoning. But what would you say is the amount of time folks have between now and whenever to give us any written feedback and specific comments on the document?
You know, I certainly hope that within the next 2 weeks we can get comments back. I'd like to get the final draft wrapped up by the end of February, so that we can get it in front of the land use commissions in March and move that forward. That would be my suggested time frame anyway.
And you know, the bottom line is that in order for CBRE to take this to the market in an effective way, we've really got to complete the public side work. They're already out. It's listed. You've developed some marketing materials, but the story's only half told at this point, and we're not asking that the community rush the process, but I think what we are saying is, to the extent that the work we've done has answered enough questions, then I think it would make sense to start going through the formal process as soon as we can, and then it'll get refined through that process. But I think if, candidly, if I might say, as the guy that doesn't live here and gets to get on a plane and fly away, perfect is, no, don't say that, I have to leave. I have a landowners meeting tomorrow on another project, and my partner, who's not really been involved, would not be a happy camper. But I think this is one of those cases where perfect is the enemy of the good. I think if we try to perfect the draft before we start to take it through the formal process, I'm afraid we never get going. That's why I think if you can give us your feedback now, that would be really, really helpful. And so, yes, sir.
I'm John Carroll of the Design Review Board. I haven't had an opportunity to study the whole 60-odd pages. A couple of words come to mind as I read and watch. Flexibility. I'll think of the other word in a minute. But it seems to me that we are creating here a project which can move along, has flexibility on both sides. I'm very pleased that the Design Review Board is named. I think from our experience, where we've had informal reviews with many clients now, or applicants, it's been very, very good. This is set up in that fashion, as I understand it. And the sooner the Design Review Board gets involved, the better. And you referenced the guidelines, which I think is excellent. I think it is the basis, the criteria, which we've been working under for years. I want to be sure that our guidelines recognize that flexibility that we're looking for. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I want to make sure that we don't have any roadblocks in the book, if you will.
I know you and Jade talked about
Yeah.
earlier, so we'll further explore that. It goes both ways. It goes both ways. You also want to make sure that this document implements the spirit of the guidelines.
I'll be happy to, be involved in it.
We will take advantage.
A question. In the maps, I see a broad description of mixed use, and in the north parcel, I see,
On the illustrative framework plan?
yeah,
Yes.
I see residential mixed in on the
Yes.
north parcel, but not in the southern parcel. What's the thought process behind no residential there?
Well, and this is, I'm glad you asked the question. This is illustrative. This is not regulatory.
Okay.
The applicant will have to develop this framework plan as part of their application as a basis for their, if they're doing redevelopment, other than just adaptive reuse of the building, or some partial aesthetic improvements. They will have to come in and actually create one of these themselves. And that will be the framework, the template for their detailed master site development plan, which will have what uses, where are the roads in detail, where's the parking, what are the street types, what are the building types, what are the heights, and all of that. This is just one layer of what's required. We felt like we needed to put in a couple examples of what the framework plan should look like, but this is strictly an illustrative example of what they have to prepare.
Along the same lines, it seems you've stuck to the existing footprint of pavement and building footprints. Is that by design, or?
What it is it just, this is the illustrative master plan that we developed at the charrette.
Right.
And so all we're doing is we're saying, okay, if this was your illustrative master plan, this is what the framework plan would have to become. And then this would set the stage for the detailed master site development plan that is required, that brings all the specific design tools together, the pieces of the puzzle that are actually established in the code itself.
And one other clarification, actually residential uses are permitted here, but they're not single family detached. You can do
Right.
townhomes, you can do apartments, so it's not your single family detached. So actually residential uses are pretty much permitted in all the zones.
Yeah, I thought they would be.
They are,
I didn't
absolutely.
see them, that's why I.
They are, absolutely. And we're adding a lot of uses down here that are not currently under the industrial entitlement, which you all know. So this is very additive to the current entitlement. And I know there's a question about, okay, what about the existing entitlement versus this? Our intention in working with Hiram was to use this to replace the current entitlement because it really takes what's already in place and adds to it. And our recommendation is that it makes sense to just do a complete rezoning so there's no confusion as to which would control. Because I don't think we're taking anything away. In fact, I think just the opposite. We're actually taking what's there in terms of use and adding to it and creating a lot more flexibility in terms of how those pieces could be put together.
Third question. I know that sensitive area, the dark green there, there's also a suggestion of, I don't know if it's a road or a trail there. Have you looked into what could go there to make some connections?
Yeah, we actually have worked with staff, contextually with the DOT, because they would like a road there. They want some parallel capacity. And so the question is, what does that mean? Our recommendation is that there should be some pedestrian connectivity, because I think in terms of getting that constructed and permitted, that's pretty basic. If the applicant, the purchaser and the applicant comes in and wants to develop uses that are permitted under the proposed entitlement that's reflected in the code, that may not be allowed under the current permitted number of daily trips that are allowed under what the Hartford had to secure for this particular facility, although what's permitted right now is a lot of trips. But let's just say there's going to be some additional mixed use of significance. You know, that cuts both ways. Jay was mentioning this earlier. Mixed use tends to spread the time of day impacts out for most of the day, but you're still going to have a lot more people living here and coming and shopping and that sort of thing. And so there might be a desire to actually make a roadway connection here so that you can get internal trip capture instead of people driving out and back around, which the DOT would love to avoid. But that's a whole different ballgame going across the wetlands here. And the disturbance it would be absolutely very significant to actually construct it, just that alone. And so you'd have to, according to Howard, the town staff, you'd have to for sure get an Army Corps permit to do that. And that's a big deal. It may be worth it, but we're not suggesting that that should be done necessarily to move it forward. And the entitlement, I think, reflects it's pretty aligned, I think, the theoretical entitlement with what's already allowed. But that would have to be something that a purchaser would have to go through and determine whether it's worth going through that process. Because they'll be required to be incredibly sensitive in their design and their construction and their impact. But I think at the end of the day, if there's a roadway put through here and it's done correctly, it would be good for everybody. My guess is that would be a later phase of development. As opposed to conditioning the first phase of development on that, because you'd have to take a significant amount of time to get the permit.
One of the things that I had thought about, Kevin, is that could be, I've always really thought that an outstanding design for a suspension bridge in an area like that that's extremely sensitive could be done. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be cheap, but it would be just an outstanding architectural feature that might set that whole place apart, and might still be less intrusive into the wetlands and floodplain area than a regular roadway would be. So I think there are a lot of possibilities here, and that shows one of those possibilities.
How many feet, can I ask, is that dotted line? Is that 300 feet, 500 feet?
It's the existing floodplain.
If you go back to the illustrative, there's a scale there.
It's got to be pretty long.
There's a scale on there. Well, let's see.
It's at least 300-400 feet. It's the existing.
Okay.
How long is the building here approximately? I bet it's more than that. I bet it's 500.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of the difference between a type 3 application and type 4 application? Just,
Type 3 and Type 4.
yeah.
For example, they want to create new component zones that don't fit into the pre-set component zones. We kind of have like 5 or 6 of them defined, but they want to create a different component zone that's totally unique. So then they come forward with a Type 4 application, which is they set different standards for everything pretty much. It's really like a
Complete rezoning.
yeah, it's almost like a complete rezoning, like creating their own PAD zone. So it's
So a type 3 application would by and large comply with the general descriptions in
Yes.
here, as at least one building over 25,000 square feet, so that it differentiates it from a type 2. And that's,
well, I mean, the difference between the Type 2 and the Type 3 with respect to the size of the building is basically you have the master site development plan, and then you have to do a site plan, right, that gets approved by the zoning commission. So if you have a site plan for a building that's less than 25,000 square feet, that's basically approved by consent agenda by the zoning commission, whereas if it's over 25,000 square feet, it goes through a regular agenda. So that's the only difference. So the master site development plan has to go through the zoning
matter what,
commission.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a Type 3 application regardless.
Would so-called big box be a type 4 application?
Yes. When you're talking about big box, you're talking about a large format, 90, 100, 120, 130,000 square foot type, yes.
If we chose, if the town chose, we could put a restrictive language that would prevent that. We could have a type 4 application, but not the next target.
Sure, I mean, but, you know, the practical effect is it would be, just to be candid, it would be more, they'd have to come back and get affirmative approval anyway under this structure. So whether it says you can't do it now, whether it said it or not, they'd still have to get affirmative approval in the future anyway. So it would be legally unnecessary if it was a policy statement you would want in there. I guess let me say it a different way, and you all correct me if I'm wrong. If you didn't have that in there, you would still have to have an affirmative vote of the zoning commission to get it done. So
But perhaps the townspeople don't want the big box. And
we know
that's
that.
part of our policy.
That's why you see the kit of parts reflecting that that's not something that can go through a type 3.
Well, I'm just wondering, as from my name's Dugay, Bob Dugay. I think we should all be saying who we are, right? My name's Dugay, I live in Simsbury. And I value my quality of life here. I go to the doctors occasionally. I've been to Home Depot a lot lately by chance. And I don't mind going to Bloomfield, right? So if I were emperor, I would have a statement somewhere in type 4, what is it called, developments, type 4 application that would discourage emphatically big box type development.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we need to talk about and we could consider, but we'd have to define it. And to name something, I think we would have to be careful that there weren't unintended consequences also. So we'd have to come up with a threshold that makes sense.
Here's something I'll say, and I have not read this, if I had known it was available, maybe I would have tried to download it or obtain a copy. I think it's unfortunate that there's not, as far as I can see so far, not a statement about perhaps large-scale manufacturing. And I don't know what that would be. It would probably be some type of light manufacturing.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by not a statement? I apologize.
Well, there's not, I mean, we seem to be talking, I have some other comments to make too, but I don't want to
Sure.
tie everybody up here. But we seem to be talking about mixed use in retail. Well, I always personally enjoy the fact that if I were taking someone who wasn't familiar with Simsbury, and I was driving north from the Avon line, we could be driving at 30, 35 miles an hour relatively slowly. And I could say, can you see where 3,000 people are working every day, ingressing and outgressing, I guess, whatever.
Right.
From a site. Do you see where that building is? And you really, with the berms there such as they are, and Hartford is just a wonderful neighbor. It's always so well groomed. I mean, I work elsewhere. I don't, I'm hardly ever around that area at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock, whatever time people leave and go. But you don't know it's there.
Right.
You practically don't know it's there. And I would suggest to you that there are we all want perfection, but there are a certain number of applications, uses for the site, that might not be retail or mixed use or residential.
If I could respond, I think the good news is that everybody's on the same page with you. This illustrative plan assumes that this building could be used for that. The code that we proposed assumes and affirmatively allows the entitlement for that. And I think actually that would be the best outcome if that was the primary use for the building and you also had the mixed use complementing it. Because this is a regulatory document, we've got to be careful about the aspirational comments. However, the work that we did in the charrette reflects and is consistent with what you've said. And I think it's going to be very clear when the long-term marketing is put together, not the long-term marketing, the comprehensive marketing is put together once we've completed the city side work, that CBRE is going to probably really emphasize that point. There's no question in my mind that that will be something that will be held out as a very good opportunity. I think everybody's in agreement with you.
Well, I mean, my notion is that the building would just come down, and that building, and I hope the CBRE has the magic wand, but it's hard for me to imagine how the building's going to be repurposed, frankly.
It's actually in great shape.
Oh, I'm sure it's,
Yeah.
there are outstanding neighbors, and I'm
Yeah.
sure and every bit of maintenance that's ever needed to be done has been performed. But I'm not sure how you repurpose a building like that
For manufacturing?
for manufacturing.
You know, it's
Yeah,
interesting,
not gonna happen.
we took a tour of the building, it has all of the elements that you would need for manufacturing. It's got sufficient power, it's got sufficient internal physical plant, it's got loading bays, and the free span areas in it are very, very significant. And my guess is that before its demise, anybody purchasing it for manufacturing would take a strong look at it and see if it could be reused on an adaptive basis. There's no doubt in my mind. Now, we're not structural engineers or architects, but we did have one of our members who's an architect, and we had several other folks with us from the community. And Tom, am I off base by saying that I think there's some potential for that building to be used for light manufacturing today with some retrofit?
Yeah, I don't really have the expertise to comment on that, but all of the statements you made about the building are true,
Yeah.
in terms of its capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be ultimately costed out, but I do know that it's a very significant asset to just demise it at this point. However, in fairness to the Hartford, in terms of the cost of carry, landscaping, power, security, the things that it needs to do to maintain the viability of the asset if it were to be sold in the near term, the cost of carry is very significant, many, many millions of dollars a year. So there will be a point at which the building will reach a stage of cost where it doesn't make sense to continue to keep it operational while they wait for a purchaser. I don't know what that point is. I'm not encouraging us to find out, but
Ideally, we go forward. And let me ask you too many questions. I have really a statement to make almost. I found it very interesting that I can't remember if it was today's paper or yesterday's paper, there's an article about the town in our grand list. And as soon as I look at the grand list, or I look at the commentary associated with the growth in the grand list, which was marginal, de minimis almost. The growth in the grand list was all from multi-use, I don't know how to express it, residential properties, apartments. The trouble with apartments is that we have to educate many of the people who are in those apartments. My children are educated here, they've received a wonderful education, I want everybody else to have the same opportunity. But what I don't think we need to do is to expand the potential bodies of children that have to be educated by any great number. But that's the most expensive service that we provide as a town. And I think there should be a policy statement here, somewhere in this document, and that all of our land use boards are on board on that regard, that there has to be a net positive growth in free funds after we provide services to whatever goes in there, that our grand list is growing, and that our costs not necessarily are going down, but aren't growing to the same degree. And there's no sense to me of building, when we talk mixed use, it sounds also convenient or something. There's no sense allowing certain types of development where we get X amount of tax revenue and we get X plus Y of expense. And I think that should be the key element here, the key governing principle should be that this development works for us economically. In variable revenue that comes from residential homes is helping us. Right now, as far as I can see in our town, I look at one select there, is that our costs are up from last year and that our revenue is flat. Taxes are going to go up. And so I really think that should be a governing principle that everyone in this town, in this document, should be adhering to.
Yeah,
That's a statement. I apologize perhaps for taking so much time to.
All I can say, because that's a complicated issue, and we certainly want to be careful that we're not advancing policy beyond, in terms of our recommendations, beyond the objective that we've been retained to help you all with. And I think from an economic development standpoint, I think that people would agree with that in terms of making sure that new development is a net positive. I can tell you during the public input process in developing the illustrative work to calibrate this code, testing the market, doing our market analysis, what we found is the type of residential that likely makes sense here, and from the cost of developing that type of residential here, it's likely going to be more attractive to young professionals or empty nesters. Will there be families with children that may live in some residential if this develops out? Absolutely. Will it be predominated by those types of families? Probably not, because of the cost of delivering that kind of development on such valuable property. The other thing that's a very important strategy for us going forward over the next year or so, within the time frame where it makes sense to not demise the building, where it's a very clear and obvious choice to actually use the building for manufacturing or professional uses or whatever, is that in order, frankly, for Simsbury and Connecticut to attract in such a large set of tenants into a building this big, you've got to be sensitive to the employment and labor retention shifts that have occurred over the last several years. We're working in Northwest Arkansas. We've just been hired by Rogers, Arkansas to do a redevelopment plan for Rogers, which is next to Bentonville. I can tell you that in Northwest Arkansas, their challenge is not jobs. Their challenge is actually attracting the 25 to 40-year-olds to take the jobs that the major corporate employers there need to fill. And the reason they're focused now on delivering mixed-use walkable neighborhoods is because they have to compete against Seattle, and they have to compete against Europe. They have to compete against markets where the 25 to 40-year-olds can work anywhere they want. And the days of corporate relocation being based on the cheapest land and the biggest incentives are over. The days now of corporate relocations happening where you can actually provide a great work environment, and some of the people that work there can actually live nearby and not have to drive for lunch is a big deal. And you have and folks who appreciate the natural amenities of this site. I don't know of any other place in New England with this large an area for development that brings all those factors together like this. So to the extent there's a residential component that's part of this, it's been very carefully considered, and we tested that in the community process. And a lot of the feedback, and it wasn't scientific, people self-selected that participated, but a lot of the feedback was very supportive that if there were a location for a variety of residential types that were embedded, that included multifamily and a range of types of multifamily, this was a really good location. I think that's consistent with your statement that development that is encouraged and supported by the town should have a net positive impact on the tax base and not be a drain on the tax base. In practice, will that necessarily play out? I think the calibration of the ordinance and the market analysis we've done in working with the stakeholders, especially the professionals in the marketplace, indicate that it's more likely than not that that will be the case. I think I'm going into dangerous waters to suggest beyond that that this code should actually have a requirement for the establishment of that threshold of concurrency. I don't know under Connecticut law whether that would even be possible. I know that in a lot of other states it's not, but you certainly have the right to consider as a policy question before you actually approve zoning generally, but I don't know specifically if that concurrency requirement can even be applied to a specific zoning case under state authority.
Certainly not being the town attorney, I really wouldn't want to go there either, but I would say that the Planning Commission in its deliberations with regard to plan of conservation and development could talk about things like that if they want to.
Sure.
But I would certainly just back up a couple of things that Scott said, that there was a lot of thought put into just what the mixes would be and what their potential impacts would be, and obviously looking at positive economic impacts are what this is all about, obviously. Frankly, if no plan or no regulation is put forward which makes sense from an economic standpoint to the Hartford, then this plan would never happen, the building might disappear, and it might be 2 cornfields instead of 1 cornfield. So I think that the reality, the economic reality has to be part of this as well. But everyone's aware currently of the fact that trying to make this a net positive is important. One other thing that Mr. Duguay said initially was very important as well, screening the uses from the road. As you can see, those large green bands adjacent to the highway are there. They're not there by mistake, certainly. And retaining that potential screening, the nice screening that's been there for years, to house a building which is 6 times larger than the big boxes we talked about already, those green spaces are going to stay. They're certainly going to propose to stay, and that's what we hope it does, continue to buffer these things from traffic.
Speaking of the green spaces along the road, is there any part of the master plan that calls for a graph of viewscape of the mountain? I read through this very quickly, and I see reference to visibility of the tower. But there's a lot of ways to see a tower. You can stand on your toes and see the tower. You can see a third of the mountain below it. I just wondered if the master plan calls for any particular proposal, just what you would see from the road and what you would not.
Basically, the way we've written into it, because it depends on where the building is proposed, at what elevation and what height, so it being possible to come up with a standard, basically they would have to come up with the recommendation for where they would put the 4-story buildings and do an analysis from Highway 10 as to what views are blocked based on that. So it's subject to an analysis of the views of the ridge and the tower from Highway 10.
Well, I'm not asking for regulation. I just wondered if part of the master.
It was absolutely considered.
Yes.
The height limitations, the contours, the setback from Hopmeadow, basically, you'd have to test every location to say it with certainty, but basically it would be very difficult to block views under the current set of
That's not really
standards.
what I'm asking. But what I'm asking is, if
sorry.
somebody has an idea
Right?
and they want to build a building, okay, is part of the master plan that if I build this building, this is what you'll see from Route 10. I'm not asking for regulation. I just would like it so that it's understood what impact that would have.
I'm not
Is that-
following.
Yeah, but the regulation says they have to show that. That's a simple answer.
Oh, okay.
The regulation says they have to show that.
Okay. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah.
Well,
And I think it's interesting too, that the green space that's along the northern piece, a couple of years ago, the Planning Commission did approve that subdivision for that property. And that green space is just exactly what the Planning Commission was talking about at that time, to move development back from Hopmeadow so that those views would not be blocked. So that was taken into account very clearly.
But still though, if you drop everything back 100 feet, depending on how much of it you want to see, you can't build something very tall back 100 feet and still see it still see the mountain.
That's right, and that's why it's very possible.
It can't be very tall at all,
Yeah.
more than 20, 25 feet.
Well, but the Hartford building itself is 4 stories in some places as well. So the screening, the topography, it's all
But it's much more
important.
than 100 feet off the road.
No question about it, but I think that the topography has to be shown, the way things are set back has to be shown. The other thing that's sort of interesting, has always fascinated me, is that people want really good architecture. The Design Review Board tells people, we want really good architecture. Okay? We'd like you not to see it, but we really do
Well,
really
there you
like
go.
it. So we're working on that blend now, that's all I'm saying. We're trying to.
So another question I had is that I understand the need for streamlining, and I really think I know what we're up to here, and I understand the need for predictability. But there's an awful lot of authority that goes to the town staff. Is there any recourse for appeal of those decisions or review of those decisions?
Well, there's 2 things. I would back up and take a look, take a careful look at the type 1 application is really a simple application. I mean, that's the only one that's really straightforward. Anything else can go to the commission, even if it goes as a consent item. If one person on the commission says, hey, wait a second, we'd like to discuss this, then it gets full discussion.
So all the decisions I see that can be made here by town staff function as like a consent agenda. That is, it still goes to a commission.
They do. Ultimately,
This is what we've decided,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, interior renovations, for example, don't go to commissions now. So simple things like that, and that's really what a type 1 application is. But when you start to get greater than that, I can certainly tell you that I know full well that I'm not going to do that stuff on my own, nor is the rest of the staff, the environmental staff, enforcement staff, all has that clearly embedded in their psyche. zoning commission wants to see things, they're going to see them. And as I said, if even one person says, we think this should get a full discussion, then so be it.
Okay, and they'll be made aware of the decisions as they proceed.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely, they're all on the agenda, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And
So
again,
that's the public's opportunity to become aware of what's going on.
the public,
Planning-wise.
the public opportunity starts way before that, and I don't want to get into a whole process discussion with you this evening, but simply say that anytime anything is filed, the applications are all online, the information is all available in office, people are welcome to come in and take a look at the files, so they're certainly welcome to do that anytime they want. We encourage that. The phone call, somebody says, hey, what's going on, we spend as much time as necessary to get with them so that.
Well, and it starts even sooner than that. I mean, it starts with what we're doing right now. The calibration of this development and design tool, where there's more of a focus on form and pattern than there is on use. Use is more flexible. Gives the public notice through the process of adopting this tool also. You know, a good percentage of what the nature and character of any development that will come out of this project will have been disclosed and known when the zoning commission ultimately considers whether or not to adopt the proposed ordinance. That's not true of typical zoning tools because there's still a focus more on use, and then by the time the parking requirements are met, the setbacks are met, you know, all that you're really focused on is the colors. Maybe, or the buffers of the residential next to the commercial. In this case, anybody could sit down and take a little bit of time and do some theoretical design analysis of the document once it's adopted. And within a range of specific outcomes, you could have a good understanding of, regardless of the mix of uses, the general character, quality, pedestrian feel, scale. That's all predetermined, and the public will have been notified before any of those tools are adopted too. So I think it's really important to look at this as a kind of a two-step notification to the public. There's a lot more detail in this particular tool than you would get under your conventional zoning, and therefore the public gets 2 bites of the apple instead of 1.
One other point I'd just like to add to it, it's really important for whomever might be either listening or watching this, is that we're going to be relying and looking for a lot of assistance from the state. You know, there was a comment made before about taxes and why corporations do what they do. We're very cognizant of that, certainly, and we want to make sure that the state, and whether it's DOT or OPM or Department of Community and Economic Development, all get involved in this process, and so we're trying to bring them into this process as much as possible, get as much assistance from the state as possible, because we think going forward, whether it's getting a permit in an expeditious fashion to a potential developer, or doing something with economic development with regard to taxes, or setting up specific criteria, we're going to be looking very, very heavily at the state to participate, and we're hopeful that they will. So we're aware of that.
We're supporting the effort to bring 500,000 square feet of manufacturing to this site. That would be a big deal.
I just have one more and I'll be quiet.
Sure, no, that's why we're here.
Is there something about this site that you think reducing the open space requirement to 10% is important?
Yeah,
I mean, is this site much
Yeah.
more marketable at 10%?
yes.
Clearly is more
Yes.
marketable, but is it that important? to
It
the
is.
site?
It is. I don't think somebody will necessarily do that, but the reason I think that flexibility is important is for 2 reasons. One, you already have a lot of protected space here. Yes, because it's next to the river, and yes, it's because there's wetlands. But almost no other site in town is constrained by the fact that the price of entry is tens of millions of dollars to fill up this building. And I'm not saying that the town should give up on its vision and its policy of protecting green space, but you're one of the most successful communities in the United States as a percentage of your land that's protected. And I think all the factors are so unique here. You already have the Hartford doing an amazing job of a low impact design with a huge impact amount of development. And I just think that the requirements that we've put in place to create a walkable mixed-use area with embedded public spaces gives you, yes, an urban environment, but an urban environment that has natural amenities, and I would rather you measure those for this particular site on a quality basis versus a quantity basis. If we applied a traditional low-density, semi-suburban or rural standard to this site, then I think we would be ignoring the other factors. And so I think it's not just a balance. I think it's actually a combination of things that will create a really great place. And I don't think that just mathematically you're giving up anything by reducing that requirement for this particular location. You could argue that different ways, but we've done a lot of thinking about that, and we struggled with it. It wasn't something that we just went, let's just reduce it because we want to help the Hartford move the building. It was because this is one of the few locations where you could create in a greenfield environment the kind of walkability that you have from the patterns that this town has had for centuries, and that is rarely accomplished in this day and age in the real estate markets. Then we felt like the emphasis on prescribed qualities of the street types and embedded smaller public places would be more than a better trade-off than a mathematical adherence to a certain level that would be applied to other locations. I don't know, Hiram, if you agree with that, but there was a lot of thought that went into that, there's no doubt.
I do. I'd just like to add this too, Alan. I think one of the reasons for open space is people historically have not been able to deal with their stormwater very well. And one of the things that we specifically did was plug into our whole LID study and the fact that low impact stormwater detention and stormwater treatment, both in terms of quality and quantity management, has to be part of this process. So if you can reduce the open space to 10%, but you're still required to deal with all those stormwater requirements as part of this process, then we feel as though we've accomplished what we needed to do and made it more attractive for development. So, plus, as Scott said, it's very important. There's floodplain here, there's wetlands here. There may be even some species on the site that we'll be very careful of as well. So the site is well protected. And keep in mind, this regulation is for this site specifically. It's really been tailored to this site. So we think, and let us know if you think we're wrong, but we think because of those reasons, we're well protected, and we think it will be well engineered, and have to be well engineered in order to protect those resources.
And my guess is that because of what Hiram just said, the realities are, I don't think somebody's going to probably get down to that low, because they're going to have to figure out how to mitigate and implement those environmental requirements. And you know, it's going to be a cost factor too, and at the end of the day, it'll be a balance for them. I think there's an internal self-regulation there that we've built in that will encourage good practices. And I don't think people are going to go to this site and go, well, let's just pave it over because we can get down to 10%. I think just the opposite. I think in order to be attractive for higher end, residential, for retirement, for especially boutique retail, the kind of retail that you all want here, not the kind of retail that you don't want, higher end restaurants, I think you're going to have a lot of embedded open space because I think that's where the market is headed, and that's what really I think is attractive. So,
Hiram, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Sure.
In terms of the grand list, what's the, in round numbers, the annual contribution from just the southern parcel?
Well, I mean, the number is like 1.6, 1.8 million, something like that. So whatever that is.
So if we don't get this right and we see that go down to zero, that's kind of influencing the flexibility we're building into the plan here.
Well, it is. I mean, I think that we think that the structure, and certainly other folks here know far better than I, that not only is it worth saving, but there's a tremendous potential upside for that, you know, not having to rebuild it. I mean, just in terms of sustainability, just think in terms of the ability to take that building down. Somebody asked the question today, well, what if you were to demolish the building? What happens? Well, it's next to some sensitive resources. Are there things in the building you have to be very careful of? It's a huge project, obviously, as it was to build it. So we think that there are a number of good reasons why it should be kept. Now, hopefully, John McCormick can find somebody from one of his clients that agrees with that. We think that the potential for that serving as a nucleus for a really neat development for that area would benefit everybody.
but if we were hired by the Hartford to come in and actually do a privately driven zoning tool for this, to then reposition it, and there wasn't a question of cost of carry of this asset, we would make, I think, almost identical recommendations on the tool that we recommended. I don't want to equate that the flexibility we're putting in is in any way to suggest that we're somehow trying to pay less than appropriate focus on quality requirements. I think the market is going with us. I think if you, let me say it a different way. I think if we just went in and said, this should be retail and this should be housing and this can only be more, industrial manufacturing, and we applied that, it was very clear what the outcome was going to be because we did that, and I call that paint by numbers. First of all, I don't think it would sell. Second of all, I think we would end up running out of time. And so I equate flexibility with the ability to actually attract a higher quality of development, not a lesser quality development. I know that's not necessarily what you were suggesting, but I want to reinforce it because I think a lot of times people hear the word flexibility and they think, oh, laissez-faire, we get to do whatever we want. The trade-off, the quid pro quo for flexibility, is you really have to step up your game to come in and even think you're going to participate in proposing a development and doing the analysis of achieving the level of rents and the level of returns for specific vertical elements of the development in order to justify putting a price on the table that the Hartford would even entertain. So I think there is an economic underpinning to this. If it were purely flexibility in that, here's the uses that you get and here's the amount of development yield that you get and you can do whatever you want on the site, that would be wrong. And that's certainly not what the document reflects.
Hearing no further questions? Seeing no further questions? Anybody else? Please email me if you have any comments, questions. I read them all. I will forward them on to Scott and Jay, and we'll get answers to them. Thank you very much for coming out on this tough evening, and we really appreciate it. We look forward to finishing this process in the near future. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Scott.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.